Welcome to the Nameless.
I walked for hours and came back to my own footprints. I remember stopping when I realized it. The ground was soft from rain the night before, and the prints were clear, pressed deep into the dirt. Same tread pattern, same slight drag on the right heel I'd had since an old ankle injury. I stood there staring at them, trying to understand how that was possible, because I hadn't turned around. I knew I hadn't. The forest was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like it was waiting for me to notice. I'd grown up a few miles from that stretch of woods, but I hadn't been back in years. The town nearby barely existed anymore. A handful of houses, an abandoned gas station, and a post office that only opened twice a week. Most people called it a lost town, but really it had just faded. No big disaster, no headlines. Jobs dried up, families moved on, and the forest crept back in. I was there because I needed quiet. That sounds simple, but it wasn't. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, the kind where nothing dramatic happens, but everything feels hollow afterward. I took time off work and drove out to my uncle's old cabin, which sat on the edge of the woods. He'd passed away the year before, and the place had been sitting empty. I remembered the trails from when I was younger. Easy walks, nothing extreme. I figured I'd spend a few days hiking, clearing my head. The first day was normal, quiet, but the good kind. Birds, wind through the leaves, the smell of damp earth.
The trails were less maintained than I remembered, but still visible. Fallen branches, overgrown brush, nothing unexpected. I walked for maybe an hour and turned back before dark. That night, though, I had trouble sleeping. Not because I was scared, it was just restless. The cabin made noises the way all old buildings do. Wood popping, something scratching near the foundation. At one point, I woke up convinced I'd heard footsteps outside, but when I checked, there was nothing, just trees and darkness. The next morning, I decided to take a longer walk. There was a trail I remembered that cut deeper into the forest, leading toward where the town used to be before it shrank. I packed water, a snack, my phone, and a flashlight. I told myself I'd turn back if anything felt off. At first, it felt familiar. The path narrowed, but it was still clearly a trail. The trees grew closer together, their branches overlapping overhead, dimming the light. The air smelled different, cooler, heavier. I remember thinking it was quieter than it should have been. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own steps and my breathing. About 40 minutes in, I passed a wooden marker half buried in leaves. It was old, gray, the lettering worn away. I didn't remember it being there, but that didn't mean much. Trails change. That was when I noticed the first odd thing. I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped walking, and they stopped too. I waited, listening. Nothing.
After a few seconds, I told myself it was just my echo, or maybe an animal moving away. I kept going. A while later, the path split, left or right. I didn't remember a split, but I chose the left path because it sloped slightly downward, and I figured it would loop back eventually. As I walked, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. A fallen tree I was sure I'd passed earlier. A cluster of rocks shaped like steps. It felt like déjà vu, but stronger, heavier. I checked my phone. No signal, but that wasn't unusual. I checked the time. It had been almost 2 hours since I left the cabin. That's when I came back to my own footprints. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to think logically. Maybe I'd unknowingly walked in a loop. Maybe the trail curved more than I realized. But the problem was, the footprints were fresh. The edges hadn't softened. And there were no other tracks around them. Just mine. I felt a tightness in my chest, the kind that comes before panic, but I forced myself to stay calm. I turned around, following the footprints backward, retracing my steps. After 10 minutes, I reached the split in the path again. Only this time, there was no split. It was just a straight trail, stretching ahead, exactly the same as the one behind me. I stood there, turning slowly, trying to orient myself. The trees all looked the same now. Tall, thin trunks, bark dark with moisture.
I picked a direction at random and walked, telling myself not to rush. The forest started to feel wrong. Not threatening, just incorrect. The light didn't change the way it should have as time passed. It stayed stuck in a dull, late afternoon gray. The air was still. Even my footsteps sounded muted, like the ground was absorbing the noise. Every so often, I'd hear something just out of sync with my movement. A step that didn't match my pace. A breath that wasn't mine. Each time I stopped, it stopped too. At one point, I thought I saw someone ahead of me on the trail, just a shape between the trees. I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. The shape didn't move. When I got closer, it was just a broken stump, angled in a way that looked like a person standing still. That was when I started to feel tired in a way that didn't make sense. Not physically exhausted, but mentally drained, like I'd been concentrating too hard for too long. I tried to think back to the cabin, to something solid and real, but the memory felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I don't know how long I walked after that. Time didn't feel reliable anymore. Eventually, I noticed something scratched into the bark of a tree. 3 short lines, carved shallow but deliberate. I stopped and stared at them, because I recognized them. I'd made them. I remembered doing it as a kid, marking the trail so I wouldn't get lost. The bark had grown around the scratches, but they were still there. That meant I was close to the edge of the forest, close to home. Relief washed over me, so sudden it almost made me dizzy. I followed the trail with renewed energy, watching for more markers. And then I saw the cabin. It was partially hidden behind the trees, just like I remembered. Same sagging porch, same dark windows. I hurried toward it, heart pounding. As I got closer, though, something felt off. The door was open. I was sure I'd closed it. I slowed down, every instinct telling me to be careful. I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking under my weight. Inside, the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. No settling sounds. No wind through the cracks. Then I saw myself. I was standing in the middle of the main room, facing away from the door. Same clothes, same posture. I wasn't moving. For a moment, I honestly thought I was looking at a mirror. Then the figure shifted slightly, and I realized it was breathing. My mind tried to reject what I was seeing. I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's nightmare. I took a step back, the porch creaking again. The figure inside turned its head. It didn't turn all the way, just enough for me to see part of its face. My face. Blank, expressionless, eyes unfocused, like it was listening to something far away. I don't remember deciding to run. I just did.
I bolted off the porch and back into the trees, branches whipping at my arms, my breath coming in short bursts. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed distance. The forest felt different now, closer, tighter. The path narrowed until I was pushing through brush. I could hear something behind me, not footsteps this time, but movement. Not fast, steady. I thought briefly about stopping, about turning around and facing whatever it was. The thought passed as quickly as it came. Eventually, I broke through the trees and stumbled onto a gravel road. I fell to my knees, gasping, the sound of my breathing suddenly too loud again. The forest edge was right there, just a few feet behind me, perfectly ordinary. I stayed there for a long time before I stood up. The road led back toward the main highway, toward civilization. I followed it without looking back. I never went back to the cabin.
I called a realtor a week later and sold it as is. I didn't tell anyone why I left so suddenly. I didn't have words for it that would make sense. Sometimes, though, I still think about the forest, about how it felt like it was folding in on itself, like it wasn't leading me somewhere new, but keeping me where I already was. Every now and then, when I'm walking alone, I'll notice my footsteps sounding slightly out of sync, or I'll catch a glimpse of someone ahead of me who looks just a little too familiar, and I always make sure I don't follow them.